We'll start with just a very, very brief background. So my name's Jacob. I'm head of sales here at Prodo. We're a digital transformation agency, and we've been providing consultancy and expert digital solutions into the housing space for over 20 years, working with hundreds throughout that time of all shapes and sizes, from very, very small to very large as well, and sort of everything in between. And yeah, the reason for covering this topic, we look to use our sort of quite unique position of the Housing Hive as having many, many contacts across the space to talk about best practice, talk about sector trends, and hopefully share sort of innovative ideas and hear from people who are using these sorts of things. And we've done all sorts of different topics in the past, all sort of uploaded to our YouTube. But yeah, obviously AI is one which feels like it's changing every single day at the moment in terms of progression and different use cases for it. That obviously comes with its own sort of set of risks and things to be aware of. And yeah, from our perspective as a digital agency, providing things like digital solutions and apps and customer portals and websites and things to the housing space, and consulting on sort of best practice around all of those things. The sort of the main use case for us, obviously from an internal point of view, we're using it for all sorts of different efficiency savings and things. And me, in my role as head of sales, I'm responding to lots and lots of tenders. I'm quite often using Copilot to find different policies and things in our SharePoint, which is great for me. But yeah, when it comes to supporting our housing sector clients, our sort of main use case for AI so far has been focused on looking to help streamline the repairs diagnostics process. So in our app, you can use image recognition and voice recognition AI built in to sort of help tenants I suppose, locate and diagnose defects in the home as accurately as possible, all with the sort of idea of sort of hopefully getting that first time fix or improving the chances of getting there. But yeah, when we were sort of discussing this topic as a something to cover on the Housing Hive, we really wanted to bring people on board with us who have used AI for different purposes. And yeah, we'll quite often, as those of you who are sort of familiar with this session, we'll quite often bring guest speakers involved to help us with that, I suppose. And today, as you'll have seen, we have Nick Atkin from Yorkshire Housing, the CEO, and Adam Lilley-Byrne, Digital Marketing Manager from L&Q as well, to sort of hopefully bring quite different perspectives. Obviously, Nick is a CEO and Adam focusing quite solely on the sort of the digital marketing side of things. Very, very different use cases, but really interested to hear some insights from the guys. So we've prepared a bunch of questions and a bit of an agenda for today, but as we've got guest speakers live on the call, please feel free to use the chat to sort of pose any questions that you might want to get over to the guys, just to hear from their experiences or some advice as well. So please feel free to do so. But yeah, I suppose brief introduction completed and a bit of background on the Housing Hive and today's topic. It'd be great to hand over to you guys if that's okay. Maybe start with yourself, Nick, in terms of a brief intro to yourself, the organisation and your position, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Great. Morning, everybody. Great to be here. So I'm Nick Atkin. I'm born and bred in Doncaster, a Donny Rovers fan for all my life, so you can never accuse me of being a glory hunter. But I am Chief Exec at Yorkshire Housing. We own and manage about 20,000 homes across all of God's own country of Yorkshire, which is 100 miles north to south, 100 miles east to west. The most beautiful part of the world, and the only part of the world where anybody surely wants to be. Also, we've got big growth ambitions to build 8,000 new homes. We're halfway through that. And finally, relevant for this as well, we are right in the middle of a full-scale rollout of Salesforce across every aspect of our business.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for joining us. And over to you, Adam, if that's all right.
Yeah, so I'm Adam Lilley. I'm the digital marketing manager for L&Q. I'm from Coventry, so I'm a little bit north from the London base that we have. Definitely have family in Yorkshire for sure, so I know that feeling. A lot of A-ups and ours in our family. Yeah, so I deal with basically our digital approach in the developer arm of L&Q. So we're looking at our website, our CRM, and just our general digital presence, and looking at a general kind of strategy for the team basically. So yeah, that's where I kind of cover.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, guys, and again, thanks for joining us today as well. So yeah, there's a number of sort of questions. We're not doing a presentation today because I feel like based on having a couple of guest speakers with us and also the nature of the topic, it kind of is more conversational really, rather than us just sort of boring death by a PowerPoint side of things. So we've got a number of questions just to run through to sort of help us guide us through. But yeah, again, if anyone's got any queries or anything they'd sort of piques their interest and might want to ask Nick, myself, or Adam, or anyone else on the call, feel free to do so. But yeah, we'll make a start then. So, and I suppose you both bring quite different perspectives to this. With Adam, your focus being quite focused on marketing and efficiencies and effectiveness around that, and Nick, maybe yours from a more strategic angle at Yorkshire Housing as a whole. But from your perspective, Nick, as CEO of Yorkshire Housing, it'd be great just, I suppose, to start with hearing how you've used it in the past so far, what your plans for it are, and how you sort of see it transforming certain elements of housing, I suppose, from a strategic level that you sort of sit at the organisation.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I think I'd start by saying that the genie's very much out of the bottle. AI is not going away. It's not a fad. And I hear some of the comments that I heard, interestingly, in previous phases of my life. So when social media first started to bubble up. Now, for some on this call, this is going to be quite a revelation on some of the things I'm about to say. First of all, there used to be a world without social media. That's the first shock horror. Second shock horror, there was a time before we had the internet. Now, I know some of you now in meltdown thinking, how on earth did anything happen and anything get done? But there was a time when there was no internet and everybody thought the internet was a new fad. And also, there was a time, believe it or not, when we didn't have mobile phones. And people thought mobile phones were just for City of London bankers who used to carry these big bricks around with them. And actually, they'd have no sort of practical use whatsoever. AI is in exactly that same position. The difference between all those other changes and AI is the rate at which it's changing and moving across. And I think if you look at it's exponential, and that's why the first thing I'd say is the genie is out of the bottle. You cannot put it back in. And what I mean by that is that by the time you have written policy or guidance on how to deal with AI in your organization, it's already moved on 2 generations. So your guidance will be out of date before you even get to publish it. So for me, this is about how, as a leader in our business, how I establish that clear vision about what's AI's role within our organization. And I think I'm always glass half full. So I'm always keen to emphasize, what are the benefits? How can it help us do things faster, easier, take sort of the grunt element out of some of the task-based elements that we have in our work, but also where it fits strategically. So sharing with the business that this is something that we're discussing at board level, at exec level, and is part of our target operating model, which is linked to the rollout of Salesforce platform. So I suppose from the outset, we've focused on what's the outcome, how can it help us? And so, our big strategic aim is to shift the premise of the landlord service offer from being reactive to being preemptive. So AI is a massive turbocharge element to what we'd already got planned on that. But it's also about how we can deliver a much better customer service. And AI, I think, can continue through its continuous learning, can really help us to better understand some of the things that our customers are saying about us, and particularly linked to sentiment analysis. And I also think, as a leader, it's my responsibility to walk the talk on everything we do at Yorkshire Housing. But so certainly on AI, I need to demonstrate that commitment. If I'm saying that this is an integral part of our engine to change our business, I need to provide the resources to support the delivery of that. So we have got people working on this. We've brought in Dr. Guy Marshall, he's a doctor in AI. Can you imagine how big his brain is? It just blows me away. But he's now giving us, he's like an advisor, so we're using him as a sounding board. But also that we've increasingly gone to a test and learn type approach with things. So, but all of what I'd say about AI is it's there to help. It's not the panacea. It's not the answer to everything. It's at the end of a process normally as a check and balance, rather than at the start, to automate and complete everything for us. And I know people think that the robots are going to take over the world and all that malarkey, but it isn't. This is just about how can we make sure that A, we've not missed anything, and also B, just take away some of those mundane tasks. Really quick example. We did a survey the other week of our managers. We got our managers together for sessions. They gave me feedback, and we just ran that through Copilot, and it provided the summary for me. I didn't even have to look at the results. It was great. It's that sort of thing. So really small example, and then also big examples. But yeah, that's where it sits for us.
Excellent. It's really interesting, and certainly I know we'll come on to something around sort of risk management and sort of how best to sort of test and adopt these sorts of things. But I like that you mentioned the fact that you have a doctor of AI sort of as an advisor, because I think it is one of those things that, because it's still, obviously it's sort of been around for a few years now, really, but in terms of the growth of it, it still feels very, very new, doesn't it? And having an expert in the space to sort of help advise maybe how to adopt it or what to look at first, I think is very, very valuable for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also your point, Nick, on sort of using it to check sort of ends of processes and things is an interesting one, because I know, Adam, when we spoke about this from a marketing and sales perspective around, you guys use certain elements of this around this sort of helping you get started at parts of the process and things as well, don't you? Rather than, I suppose, going back to Nick's point of getting some of that brunt work done and then using that as the base to work on. So from your point of view, as your role at L&Q around marketing properties and the sort of the digital element, how has the use of AI sort of influenced your approach at L&Q?
Yeah, well, we're really much at the start of our journey, actually, to be honest. We've been working on a working group in our team, and we've got a few of us together to look at, how we can start to use it from a marketing standpoint, really. And you're right, Jacob, you've just said it there, that, we found like certain elements, looking at what we can use and what we do every day, what we've seen out there and what we can use. I think from ChatGPT, the language model kind of systems, they work really well to kind of, help us out of a mental block. If we're looking for we're trying to come up with new copy or something, we're trying to refresh copy from a site that we've had for a long time, or looking to try and, sell stock plots. That kind of point where it's a great starting point to just get us out of that block, if you will. Look at fresh copy in that way. We can prompt it to kind of ask it, and it understands the platforms as well. So obviously with Facebook and Instagram and other platforms, it knows the difference in the copy and what you need to put in there. Subtle differences between like a Facebook headline and an Instagram kind of copy. It does pick that up. So it's great in that. But I think, as Nick said earlier, like, it's not the be and end all in any sense of the matter, and definitely not at the moment. It doesn't really understand the tenures that we work in. So even when we're putting our website in the prompt and saying, look at our website and, try and come up with that copy, it doesn't really pick up the tenures very well. I think there's a very surface level understanding of, what we offer, from shared ownership to rent to buy to what we offer in London, LLR. It doesn't really get it. It doesn't know the right wording to say around it. And then also the other standpoint is just it doesn't understand your brand voice as well. And we all try to kind of create our very specific brand voice. I know Nick definitely. I've just seen on your website recently, definitely have that distinctive brand voice. I don't think AI picks up on it that well. I must say it'd be interesting to see if they try and do Yorkshire accent on chatbot. But yeah, so that's where we've seen it work really well, where we think we can really use AI from the working group we've had, was the virtual staging software. So basically you can take a empty stock plot images internal and basically virtually furnish the property. And because of the quickness of it and the ability to prompt it in different ways, we could offer 3 different versions of the same plot using, mid-century modern interior to, very bright coloured interior. And that helps us to kind of really, think about, when we've got stock plots, we could literally go out, take the photographs, and then get it staged really quickly. And even then, we always have to get approval. So, there's always that case of being able to amend here and there as well very quickly. It doesn't replace the virtual staging companies we may use to kind of do the great imagery that we can put on, billboards and brochures and stuff like that. It just means it's a really great tool to use when we really need to get something out really quickly. When we've got these stock plots and they're sticking and we need to just, get something to create something quickly and then get it out there basically. And they would look great on kind of like Rightmove listings and stuff like that. So I think from a practical point from us on the marketing side, I think it really helps with that kind of way of, I think that virtual staging is something that we will definitely be looking into starting to use basically. And then ChatGPT would be something that really helps us to kind of, get us out of a mental block, I'd say.
Yeah. So I suppose just helping you guys to make part of certain processes more efficient, then I suppose, rather than what you both said so far in terms of using it for everything in a particular process, which makes total sense. Certainly when we consider, lots of the conversations we have with housing associations when we're talking about digital transformation and digital solutions and things, often how we sort of pitch these sorts of things is that digital is a great way of helping you create capacity in the organization, because leveraging technology can do certain things that maybe are the potentially avoidable tasks that a human simply don't need to do. And I suppose on that basis, Nick, with your sort of approach to innovation and I think being relatively well known across the space for your stance on digital from a housing point of view, how would you say you're balancing the potential usage of technological advancements with the human elements of housing? Because that's something which we get asked quite a lot when we're pitching digital solutions. It's like, okay, your digital solution looks great, but we absolutely cannot lose the human element here. Is that a balance that you've had to sort of contend with on your side?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's not one or the other, and I think that's where I sometimes get a little bit frustrated that where the debate goes. So we have to accept that for the vast majority of our customers, dealing with us as their landlord is a hygiene factor. They just want us to do something when they need us to do it, and the rest of the time they want us out of their lives. And so, they want to be able to do that in a time and way of their choosing. And we also need to accept that our customers aren't in some digital desert. They do actually use the internet. They do actually use mobile phones. They do actually prefer to have a seamless self-serve option if it works and where it actually gives them what they need, because it's a lot quicker and easier than having to verify themselves by giving the maiden name of their dog and their inside leg measurement before we speak to them. So I think we need to accept that for the vast majority of customers, if we offer a really good self-serve offer, they'll take it. However, the point is that then releases the resources that we currently have answering phones for everybody to provide much more intensive support for those customers who really need it. And again, let's be honest, the last 2 to 3 years, like everybody else on this call, we have seen a huge increase in what I would say are low-level mental health challenges that our customers are experiencing. And in many of our communities, and this isn't a criticism of local authorities or health services or anybody else, they're cash strapped. And that means that we're the last organisation standing. So digital needs to be seen as an enabler and not a panacea. Now, that's hard for somebody like me to say because I love everything digital. But this is about actually setting it in that context of a service offer. In terms of how you get there, I think for me, it's the classic approach to innovation. You start with pilot projects, you fail fast, fail cheap. That's the mantra for me, and not just because I'm Yorkshire, but also the fact that actually that reduces the risk and it allows also interest in the organisation to really learn from that process and really start to flourish. So I think where AI sits, if you're trying to develop a culture of innovation, you've got to encourage your colleagues to experiment with AI technologies, and you've also got to give them a cultural sense of empowerment to propose and develop new ideas. And again, housing is very traditional. It's been a very safe space. It's not had a burning platform. It's not had that need to change. And so therefore, sometimes you need to coax people into this different way of thinking. And also, I think the final thing I'd say on this, because again, the risk with AI is that you could potentially lose the human element. So I think you've got to have user-centric design. You've got to have humans. You've got to have your customers actually in that process at some point. So yes, the AI can either do something at the end once you've got their feedback, or it can do something at the beginning that you can test with them as the actual customer. But we do need to make sure that whatever comes out of the sausage machine is not only intuitive, but also that it solves real business and customer problems rather than individuals' hobby horses or perceived issues that actually, when you test them, don't stand up to reality. So for me, it's about what is it our customers want from us, and how then can AI, alongside all the other things we do, help drive that change and that shift that we need.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that kind of relates to a couple of questions that we've had, which I'll get into in a second. But I think just quickly going back to your point on, you made the point of there's probably a large bracket of customers from a tenancy point of view who do have a potential preference of digital in certain ways. And it made me think of a workshop that we ran after some research with a client of ours in the past, whereby we looked into the call volumes and call types and sort of paired that with sentiment and sort of communication preference and things. And what we found was that actually at any one time, there's approximately 60 to 70% of people in a call queue who did have a preference for digital, which in turn, that final 30 to 40% of people who don't have a preference for digital, maybe for whatever purpose, whether it be affordability, access needs, or disability or anything around that, their experience was worse because they're having to wait for all the other people to get seen as well. And it's kind of one of those, isn't it, that I think you make the very good point that it's just one part of a wider digital strategy, AI really, and all of it should be based around customer centricity and making sure that customers are brought on the journey in terms of how best to leverage it, I think. But no, thank you for that, Nick. And before we go back to you, Adam, there is a couple of questions that just kind of feed into a couple of points Nick made there. So one from Matt McPartland from South Liverpool Homes, who touched on whereabouts are you in the journey of having conversations and engaging colleagues around AI use, and similarly, Amanda Kratz has kind of mentioned, as I suppose, linked to that. Have you got any specific tips around convincing reluctant senior management in terms of incorporating AI? Probably coming back to people's misconceptions of it or a bit of nervousness around it. How are you finding that at Yorkshire?
Right, okay. Great questions. So the first one around encouraging people to sort of utilize it. I think you need to remember that whatever you pump out on ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever else is going into the wider world. So if you're going to do this, my advice would be that you have something, because we're, like many Office 365 site, where we use Copilot, but we use Copilot within our IT operating framework. So that means that and in particular, customer relevant data is not going into the wider world. It's staying within Yorkshire Housing, but we're able to draw down the information from the wider world. I think there's a thing about people asking the right questions. So it's like that sort of old adage of sort of crap in, crap out type stuff. So we have done a bit of work with people and I think that's where, interestingly, I mentioned Guy Marshall. That's where he's really helped, because he's just sort of shown the difference between the type of question you ask and the type of answer you get, which is fascinating. So it's about getting people to ask the right questions, and then, as I said before, doing that in a remembering that we're dealing with customer sensitive data very often, or organizational sensitive data, and we'll probably talk about fraud later, I suspect. But that's why it needs to be in a secure environment. I would say for anybody, no, not just managers, for anybody who is unsure about the power of AI, I would say go to your own organisation's website, get a job app, get a job that's advertised, and then run through AI, either ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever. Ask it to write you a job application for that job, and when you see it done in live time, and then you could then ask them, what do I need to do to become the chief exec of Yorkshire Housing? And it will give you a suggested career path as well. Not what I did by blagging your way into the role, but actually a proper set of sort of routes to go. I think that's fascinating because you see it in real time, and the job app was fantastic. The job application that we've done when we've done that on sessions is much better than most of the applications we receive. That in itself is a risk because we are now receiving a big chunk of AI generated applications. So we're rethinking quite quickly our recruitment process because we're ending up shortlisting people who are just good at AI rather than good at the job that they're applying for.
Got you. It's a very good point, to be fair, and it's a really interesting one. When you mentioned before and sort of said that point of go to your own website and find the job ad, it popped into my head. Our CEO Pippa put a group message in our Teams channel the other day. She's like, have a little listen to this. She'd grabbed the Prodo website, put it into a Google sort of AI model that Google has, and the result was a 9-minute podcast style voice recording of two people discussing Prodo as a business or background or specialism. Some of the clients were, it's just absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. But
Ian Wright at Disruptive Innovation Network did exactly the same to me 2 weeks ago. Sent me a podcast of that had been AI generated, comparing Yorkshire Housing's business strategy with Bromford's business strategy. Fascinating. And it was like, my God, that has been generated on AI. Not one human has been near that or spoken. But what a fantastic debate. It's nearly as good as our own podcast, Raising the Roof. Quick plug, but that's it for me.
Yeah, and what everyone doesn't realise on the call is none of us are actually on this call. It's just AI talking now. But yeah, I suppose back to the questions and things that we have. Back to you, Adam, I suppose. And obviously you touched upon a few use cases that you guys have used from a sort of a more private and sort of sales and marketing perspective. So in terms of AI's role beyond the sort of social side, we've kind of touched on it for the likes of repairs diagnostics and sort of checking certain processes so far. What opportunities do you see from your side in terms of moving forwards from an AI point of view?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because generally housing associations are not seen as the trailblazers, shall we say. And we try our best at L&Q for sure, and I'm sure Nick does at Yorkshire Housing for sure. But yeah, I think the big opportunities is around kind of, I think what Nick's kind of touched on, which is like, that elements of live chat. A lot of websites and companies use live chat, but it's making it more so that it can, you might have chat bots and stuff like that, and it's making it a bit more like user friendly, making it less kind of stuck. Sometimes they can get stuck in a loop if you ask the right question. So AI can kind of help towards making sure that we point the people in the right direction or give them the answers they need. It could be that, like, you could take the live chat that has some kind of AI backing and ensure that it can answer people's questions, oftentimes on aftercare, really, isn't it? It's the big question about aftercare. It'd be amazing if that AI system can connect to our systems to, come back to them and say, this is what's happening and this is why, and maybe it points to people on the, the general questions around, what the issue might be. If it does say that, there's a problem with, a certain, load-bearing wall or something like that, and that needs to be looked at, or windows that need resealing, and then it can give the information about why it needs to be done. Those sort of answers can't be really answered by people that are on the telephone. Have got the next call waiting, and 100 people on the line. It's those kind of ways for sure, and I think a big one would be around aftercare and helping to kind of educate people. But from our point of view, from my kind of point of view, but I'm sure Nick might agree as well, is the big thing that AI could bring soon, or can already bring maybe, is looking at the data that we have and trying to look for the patterns that we can't see. We now create so much more data than we did even 10 years ago when I started my career. With thanks to CRMs and systems that give us all of that information. It would be great. I think the big kind of move would be to be able to see what patterns we see. So for me, it would be looking at lead management. How can we make sure that our leads are being looked at, and making sure we can try and shift through the ones that are cold and the ones that are hot, thinking of ways of doing that, and how does AI help us to do that. But I'm sure from when I look at a wider view, it might be looking at data from our customers and trying to point out and find patterns of what are the big issues that we're getting in our properties that we look over, and trying to put our money in the right places at the right time when we're trying to fix things, big projects, where we think long-term planning. What do we see? We've got this stock of 50s houses. We need a certain thing might come out from them that needs to be fixed soon, and AI might be able to just find out and discover those for us, basically. I think that's the big thing that AI can offer, which I think is definitely one that helps when you look at it from a wider point of view, when you look at medical and you look at other elements, it really does. Those are the big things that AI can really help with, is that massive amount of data that we now create on a daily basis, and how do we find patterns that really help us to make the right choices and more clever choices, basically.
I think it's a really good point, using AI to help with that side of things, because you're right in that even from our experience of whether it be sort of deploying a customer app or a customer portal into a housing association, because there is so many of these different systems with different types of data in, and our client finds it hard to sort of tie these things together to form out the insights. From our point of view, we've got to create integrations with all these different things, but from our client's point of view, they're struggling to. Quite often, something we hear is we're struggling to utilize our data that we have to find the insights that we know are there somewhere. And I think using AI, I think Platform Housing have done something around this. We've got conversations coming up with around sort of revisiting this topic as well, because when we originally spoke to a couple of guys there, they're using AI in some way, shape or form to analyze data for that sort of purpose that you mentioned. It is because when we talk about customer centricity and the way customer service and things are going, it is more personalized year by year, and expectations and preferences, obviously personalization, because why would people want non-personalized sort of comms, I suppose. And I think feeding into that is segmentation of data, and at the moment it's very difficult, which I think is slowly changing. You mentioned Salesforce rollout at your place, Nick, and it does feel like we did a webinar a few months ago on the fact that CRMs are now growing into the housing space, and obviously outside of the housing space, they've been around for a while. Obviously, Salesforce being a big part of that, Dynamics and HubSpot as well. So no, that's a really good point, Adam. Really good point.
Can I just come back on the data point?
Course,
sorry,
yeah,
just very quickly.
Absolutely.
I think the issue, I absolutely agree with Adam. The potential is massive there. We've got data to die for. The commercial world would die for some of our data. Yeah. The problem is, one, and as you said, Jacob, it's not accessible. It's not in a format that's accessible. But two, when it is accessible, it's not being looked after. So it's invariably rubbish and unreliable. And I suppose, the classic example of that is the only time we really know who's living in our homes is when that person first takes a tenancy. After that, we've got no idea. We've got absolutely no idea. There are some who do a bit of a customer census, etc. But it's the basics. We don't even know who's living in our home, and even when we do, we've not looked after the data. So in some cases, when you run reports, it says that three of the occupants are more than 150 years old. Now, I know living in social housing, we look after people really well, but it doesn't extend life expectancy quite that much. So I think the first thing I would say is make sure your data has been cleansed and make sure that what you're running through AI is absolutely reliable in terms of the data feeds that are going in, because AI will help to some degree to identify some of the anomalies, but in some cases they may provide you with a perverse result or recommendation which could lead you down a bit of a cul-de-sac.
Yeah. Goes back to what you were saying before around what you put in is what you get out in terms of quality, but also the way you ask the way you ask certain questions to it in terms of prompts and things does wildly change, doesn't it? Which kind of feeds into there's a few more questions to get through actually. One of the second part of Matt's question was if you looked into prompt engineering training with colleagues, and I think I might have seen you ask everyone on LinkedIn about that. I'm sure it was you. So yeah, I can pose that to the guys as well if you like. In terms of, is that something you've considered with Guy Marshall? Was it you say, Nick, around prompt engineering training for colleagues to make sure how they're using sort of language models is efficient and I suppose returns what you're hoping it to return, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. You're right. That's a key element that you do need to consider. So, and I think we are rolling that out. We're still at an early stage with that. And again, you're right, Jacob. Guy is helping us with that. But yeah, it is the sort of that going back to that adage about you get out what you put in. So you've got to ask the right question, otherwise you won't get the right answer.
Absolutely, yeah. We've had quite an interesting question from Ben. So thanks for your question, Ben. And this is something we've experienced ourselves and sort of almost had to pivot as a digital agency partner, I suppose. So Ben's point is that being new to the housing sector himself, and each housing association is looking to sort of drive towards or transition towards a digital future. With the absence of competition issues, what's stopping housing associations pooling together resources to develop things together that can be used across the sector? Because obviously individually, and it feels like it's kind of a broader digital query, this, but AI is a good example of that in terms of everyone seems to be trying to use it in slightly different ways for different purposes. There's obviously the various different platforms. For us, and I can see Jamie Hopkins, you've applied on that, one of our very valued clients, Jamie Orwell. We've had to sort of change our approach in certain ways to help with this. So in the past, when we're, from our point of view, building customer portals, building apps and building websites and things, it's historically been individual builds, quite custom to each client, and had to sort of put lots of time and effort into getting it up and running, which costs a lot of money, takes a long time to do. But yeah, we've kind of recognised that because the challenges are so similar across the sector in terms of the top priorities, we've had to change how we do things and now have a more software as a service based approach, in that we have a singular product that many of our clients feed into from a user group point of view, which means that the output from us as a supplier is something which is solving more issues as one, I suppose, and everyone's sort of feeding into a common platform to help alleviate some of that. But I think, have you got a take on that in terms of more collaboration across digital and I suppose AI as a whole from a housing point of view? Be interested to hear.
Do you want to go first, or Adam? Because it's a bit of a hospital. It's a hospital pass, that one.
It's very hard for me to say because I work in marketing for the housing arm, and I'm always thinking about my competitors.
True.
But it's a fair point, to be honest. I mean, obviously, we're part of the G15, which means that we kind of, work together with a few housing associations and looking at benchmarks of, general stats around our marketing and stuff like that. So, I think it's definitely something that is more open, shall we say, in the housing association sector for sure. I've worked in private developers where you don't speak to another private developer, or it's barely that. But yeah, I think there's a lot more kind of positive outlook on talking with our different providers in the housing association sector for sure. I think I don't know what are your thoughts, Nick? I'd be interested on your thoughts on that.
Right. Okay. So, thanks, Adam. I think for me, there's a problem. There is a problem. We've never had a burning platform, and that's why there isn't the levels of collaboration that you do see in other sectors. We're financially pretty safe, and every organisation thinks it's unique. They're not.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
build houses, we let them, we collect the rents, and we repair them. That's what we do. When you boil it down to its core basics of a landlord service. Some of the things that get in the way when we have tried collaboration goes back to the point we made before, data, and the fact that, I was part of a data sharing exercise probably 10 years ago now. And again, just the anomalies that threw up just really brought into sharp focus the fact that, until organisations have sorted out their data, there's just no point trying to collaborate and share data and pool it and then run algorithms on it. Secondly, I think the systems, many of the housing systems are still got code that starts 19 something, as opposed to 20. So that can get in the way, and the fact that some of those systems are quite closed in terms of APIs and other ways that you can access the information. Thirdly, I think the other thing that I think stops it is pace. So, my view of collaboration is I'll collaborate with anybody as long as it doesn't slow down where we want to get to as a business. I think the problem is that quite a lot of organisations have got, in my opinion, too many layers of bureaucracy and a permissions culture. So that gets in the way and it really slows stuff down. And in the end, you just think, you know what? I'm not waiting for everybody else. I'm just going to crack on and get on with it. That's all the negative stuff. However, there is room for optimism. So I wrote a piece for Inside Housing, I think over the summer, that highlights the fact that I've never seen the levels of collaboration in my entire housing career that I'm seeing now. What's driven that? What's different? Devolution. So if you look at the housing partnerships that we've now got in each of the devolved regions, there is joint working on projects, on funding applications, on data sharing of things like development pipelines, and there's nothing probably more sensitive than that, that would never have happened even 3 years ago. So I think that there is now a cultural shift, which has gone more down that route. And I think that mirrors perhaps some of the things that Adam mentioned, G15, but also things like Greater Manchester Housing Partnership, some of the things that they've been doing for quite some time now, I think is starting to spread more widely. So I think there is room for hope, but I think we do need to be realistic about the fact that there is some baggage that organisations bring with them, both culturally and also in terms of the data quality.
I'd second that, Nick, actually. I agree, actually. And I'll take back what I said earlier. I feel like in the last 10 years, which is where I've mostly been in housing, there has been that move for that kind of like working together in partnership. The joint ventures have just exploded, haven't they, really, from a kind of build standpoint. So it'd be great to see that from a project standpoint as well, and working together on those elements. At the moment, Alan Q's got some great joint ventures with Hill Group and other companies like that. So like I say, I think the private sector also can be quite helpful in working together to a certain point. And you're exactly right, like within the confines of ensuring that we all hit our own targets that we've got, don't we, really?
Yeah. That's an interesting one. Thanks, guys. Before we sort of look at wrapping up with a few sort of general questions around risk management, which is another query that's come through, which we're looking to cover anyway. An interesting one that I hadn't really considered from Matt around. We talked a little bit before. You mentioned, Nick, the example of if anyone doesn't believe in AI, go to your website, find a job ad, and ask AI to apply for it, sort of thing. Have you considered or looked into much how your customers might be using AI around potentially lodging complaints, lodging queries about disrepair, customers reviewing policies to find faults in them, those sorts of things? Is that something which has crossed your desk much so far?
I think there are some great examples in there, some great questions. I suppose we're picking that up on a case by case basis as stuff starts to come through, and you look at it and you think, blimey, this is different to what I've done before. And also going back to the point that Adam made before, the thing about AI is it's still struggling with dialect or sort of the, you know, a local way of chatting and communicating. It's getting a lot better, and I see a difference in that literally week on week on week. So, you know, you can now get AI to say "Hey up" and "How's they doing" and all that sort of stuff. But I think there are risks. I think that's one of the risks. But I think, is it a risk, or is it just giving our customers more power? Because actually, if they're only looking at your policies because for whatever reason they feel we're not delivered what we should have delivered, or what we were offering anyway. So in some ways, if it's making that process for the customer to highlight some of our shortcomings so that we can fix them, is that a bad thing?
Good point. Yeah, it's a really good point, to be fair. Yeah. It's just another way of highlighting it, which maybe wouldn't have been done before. So maybe you wouldn't have come across it and therefore not improved that particular point, I suppose. Yeah. Just on the topic of risk then, because that was another question that we had, and I know it's something we were looking to cover anyway. You kind of give a bit of a brief history of other sort of big bangs in the technology space, Nick, before, around the internet, mobile phones, etc. And I always feel like I'm in a unique position of, I was a sort of I was growing up before social media and after, but I realise that's just another sort of milestone of another tech sort of advancement. So I'm not special, as it turns out. But from a risk point of view, obviously with any sort of new technology and something which is growing so fast and something which is having so much data added into it, and the potential risk factors are, I suppose, to some extent, a little bit unknown in some areas, because it is relatively still quite unregulated, certainly sort of the open models. What sort of risks do you both foresee and sort of already look to mitigate with the usage of AI in your sort of respective organisations? Let's go first on that one.
Do you want me to kick off, Adam? You're on mute, so I'll just pile in. So I think I think, look, it's here. People are using it. Most people in your organisation are using it right now, or have used it at some point this week. Therefore, if you don't provide them with access to this in a controlled environment, they will take your data and information and pump it through an uncontrolled environment. So my strong advice in terms of managing risk is set this up and culturally make it accessible for your colleagues. Explain why you need them to use it within a controlled environment of your IT operating network, and the risks if we don't do that. Particularly related to things like GDPR, and I had a sort of question pop up in the chat on that. And that's one of the key ways of mitigating that risk. I think for me, there are three big risks. The first is ethical. There's obvious data risks. You know, we've got to protect not only our customers, but also for example, in our case, our 850 colleagues. So I think for me, there's around just some ethical guidelines, not prescription, but just a very loose framework to sort of say, you know, this is how you use AI ethically. So things like data privacy, bias, which does come out on AI still, and accountability. But also, I think it's about just being really transparent about this as well with customers and colleagues. So in terms of your comms, and I'm sure I'd talk about this much better than I can, but it's having those really open discussions about the ethical implications of AI, and really involving customers and colleagues in helping to shape how we use it and what that looks like in the future. So that's the first one. I think the second one is huge, which is fraud. So one of our head of data, we had we have lots of live chats across the business, and so it was an all company gathering, and he produced a video clip of me extolling the virtues of Lancashire. Now, anybody who knows somebody from Yorkshire knows that that's the last thing you would ever do. But I'll tell you what, that was staggeringly real in terms of what it looked like. Yeah. And that really was a moment for me where I thought, you know what, there's a real risk here. So I think certainly the risks of financial fraud are huge on this. And so I do think there's particularly when AI does develop tone of voice. So one of the reasons why, for example, we get, like everybody else, we get bombarded with fraudulent attempts on a regular basis. And they get filtered out. And interestingly, our finance team filter quite a few of them out because they laugh about the fact that there's no way Nick would actually write to me in that way on an email. Too formal, apparently, and requesting things. But once AI gets that, I think then again that will be another risk element. So I think the fraud risk is huge here. And let's face it, the criminal fraternity are probably already well ahead in terms of their use of AI. The police are probably here, and we're somewhere over here. So it's that sort of thing. The final risk for me, sorry, third one is we've got to push now to be a low carbon business. AI is using a phenomenal amount of power to power the data warehouses where this stuff's running through. And that is having a huge impact upon our carbon output as UK PLC, but also as across the whole world. So I do think we need to find a way and recognise that this stuff doesn't come free. There is a cost to the planet as a result of this huge computing power which we've now got access to. And I think that there's a bit of an honest conversation that needs to be had around how we're going to power that in a sustainable way as opposed to where it's at the moment. So they're my three. Adam, do you want to pop in?
Yeah, I'd definitely second that on the power point of view. Microsoft and Google are setting up their own nuclear power plants, or getting up old ones like 3 Mile Island, I think, is Microsoft is reopening. So, yeah, definitely on the risk for power and the environment, it's a big one. It's lots of data centers that take up all the power and energy that we have. It's massive. I think from a marketing standpoint, it's definitely being careful. That any system we use isn't kind of regurgitating anything that someone else has put out there. Ensuring that any AI we use that's kind of giving us kind of any language that we want to use, or like headlines and stuff like that, or imagery or stuff like that, is ensuring that it is ours. Like, when you look at what systems can offer, do we have a commercial license to use it? All those little nitty gritty things that just ensure it, because a lot of these are more to do with direct to consumer kind of systems rather than a business system that kind of takes into that licensing and all of that. And that's a big risk as well, is just where is that data coming from? Whether you're using Google Gemini or ChatGPT, which is basically Apple Intelligence, or Copilot, all of them, where is that coming from? Where is it getting the data from? I think that's probably one for sure that your IT team will definitely look into to make sure that that's where they want us to be. But that's a big risk, is just that where is that content coming from? Where is it grabbing it and changing it? Because at the moment it is AI is basically looking at what's out there and then coming back to you with something based on your prompt. So really, you just want to be careful that you don't get yourself into trouble legal wise on anything like that. But again, it's a wild west out there at the moment. There isn't much in regards to legislation as well, which is also a big risk. The only place that's the only kind of legislation is the EU. I think the EU have got about to I think early next year, I think, or if it's not, it's already in. They have their kind of AI legislation that covers it, but obviously that doesn't cover us anymore since 2016. And also, it is the other thing is that a lot of these companies, they're based in America, where you're probably not, depending on what happens in the next couple of years, there might not be anything out there. It might still be Wild West, and that's where their jurisdiction actually really lies. And then also, depending on what TikTok might come out with, or that's China as well, and they're trying to come up with their own AI. So it's interesting time, I must say.
Mm.
And the risks are quite large, but it doesn't mean it should stop you from like at least trying to go into it. And
Yeah, yeah.
you know, the big thing is that millennials now. I'm gonna take a guess that me and Jacob are millennials. We're now probably the largest group. We're now the largest like set of people. So the boomers have gone down a little bit, and the generation before us and Gen Z is coming next. Yeah, that means a lot of people are going to want to not talk to people on the phone. And is there any ways where AI can help with that? Is vitally important really to go into.
In terms of evolving customer expectations, I suppose moving forwards, yeah, it feels like everything really is a trade-off to be considered, isn't it? You've got the potential elements of risk around using these sorts of things. You've got the potential sort of environmental impact that you mentioned, Nick, and it's a very, very good point. But then I suppose the trade-offs against those are, okay, well, what would you do without it then? What would be the other option? I suppose is it more people? Is it more people traveling around to sort of do certain, which again is sort of environmental impact? Is all a big trade-off, isn't it? Which I know is a very, very complex one to sort of work through. But just before we finish, one final question, I suppose, and is more around the sort of the long-term impact or future of this. And I'm doing my best to try and not use typical agency terms of blue sky and big picture and 360 helicopter view thinking and stuff like that. But because for us, obviously, as I said at the start around how we've used this for repairs, diagnostics and things, we did see almost like a bit of an output of when we first run this with our client housing solutions. Of the idea was to recognize boiler types, make some models, and the output was building their asset management database and in turn sort of building that data to be more accurate. And if we're using it for more repair types, and we're basically capturing many photos of tenants' properties because they're trying to report like a broken tap, and actually if we can see in that image as well there's a bit of mold around the sink, or in the background there's some mold on the window, capturing that as well is almost using AI as a bit of a sort of a check on healthy home generally. So that's from our perspective where this is going to go for us. And I know it's a very broad question because the possibilities are almost endless at this point. We've kind of touched on some of the risk of that, but where do you see the long term of AI in the housing space? For a couple of minutes, if you've got a quick answer.
I'll do a minute and then Adam can. So I think it
Go for
will.
it.
Firstly, it will automate some of the manual tasks around core services, things like rent collection, repairs, answering common questions, facilitating requests, searching for a new home, all those sorts of things, which lots of people currently scrabble around at. I think it'll sort quite a lot of that. Secondly, I think smart home tech. So the average car has 3,000 sensors. The average home has less than 10. So I think there's a real opportunity here now to use AI alongside connecting up our homes. So exactly what you were saying there, Jacob, about gleaning data of what's going on in the home in real time and fixing things before they happen, whether that's people falling to arrears, whether that's people ending their tenancy, or whether that's a repair in the property. So I think it's got a huge opportunity to do that, to sort things, all the things you said around being able to spot things that the customer isn't asking us around or talking to us about, but we can see as a problem. And also improving energy efficiency as well, which I think is a big issue for our customers, many of whom are still making the choice between heat and eat. So I think being able to use AI for that, alongside also real-time sentiment analysis, understanding what our customers are saying about us, what their issues are in real time, scraped from live conversations that are going on across the internet. I think that's where it gets really, really exciting.
Great point. Thank you, Nick. Adam?
Yeah, I guess from my standpoint, I'm just going to hound on the data again. I do think that's going to be a massive, like a real, big push and help for housing associations is being able to, get AI. I mean, it's coming now, whether you like or not. Anyway, with Microsoft, the next update of Microsoft will have Copilot on your work laptops, won't it? It's coming. So. Yeah, it's definitely using systems like Dynamics where they will have that kind of the AI power coming in to be able to look at that data that you've got and to spot those those patterns. And I think Nick's kind of pointed out, around like energy efficiency and spotting any kind of problems that around around the house that might not be the main point of a repair that's been put through, but it is connected, and maybe that system can pick it up. So yeah, I think for sure it's been able to kind of use the reams and reams of data we've got, and to kind of be able to crunch through that and understand any patterns that we've got. But like Nick said previously as well, is I think it's making sure, from like we should be always, is that the data that we put in is valid and isn't half baked, because like you say, it will spit out rubbish.
Exactly right. Yeah,
that's for sure. So yeah, no, I think for me it's the data that I see as a big way to embrace AI for sure.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Okay, great stuff. Well, thanks for that, guys. We have gone a little bit over time, so appreciate everyone for staying on who's still here, and you guys for taking a little bit more time as well for from a guest speaker point of view. But yeah, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us. Massive thank you to Nick and Adam for agreeing to be our guest speakers on this topic as well today. We've got our next session in the month, last Thursday of the month, as always, 11 o'clock on the 28th of November. And the next one we're going to be focusing on, it kind of links to a couple of points raised today, to be fair, around digital engagement, around the cost of living crisis. And we have the COO of a leading rewards platform joining us to talk about introducing things like vouchers, like rewards and things into housing association digital platforms to encourage, usually engagement is, as you put it before, Nick, it's some sort of negative experience, something's broken, I need to pay a bill, etc. So if they can engage and get money off something to help with cost of living, etc., all the better. So we'll be covering that on the 28th of November at 11 o'clock. If anyone wants to join us, feel free. But yeah, once again, thank you very much, guys, for taking the time to speak today. It was really, really good session today, and it was a nice change not having to run through a bunch of slides and just sort of have an open conversation about it as well. So thank you for that. And yeah, we will record this and get this up online and share it on socials and things soon, so look out for that. And yeah, lunchtime, so we'll let you all go.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Great to see you all. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Adam. Cheers, guys. Take care.